Thanks, Mark. Good afternoon, everybody. As Mark mentioned, my name's Neal Mohan, and I'm responsible for Google's display advertising business. And at Google, that represents everything that's part of our AdSense network, the Google Display Network, our DoubleClick set of products, and newer businesses such as our AdMob mobile advertising network and other new products that we've acquired, such as Invite Media and Terracent. It's a pleasure to be in front of you today. The title talks about how the world of Wall Street meets Madison Avenue. The purpose of my talk is not to advocate for all of us turning into Gordon Geckos of the advertising world. The point simply is that, especially since the early 1980s, technology has had a profound impact on Wall Street and the financial industry in general, turning what was previously an incredibly inefficient market that was the domain of a small handful of traders into one that is dramatically more efficient, vastly larger than it was 30 years ago, and something that all of us have generally equal access to from a trading standpoint. And the question really comes up, which is, can technology do the same thing for Madison Avenue in the same way that it's transformed Wall Street? I'm a technologist at heart. I'm an optimist as it relates to the impact of technology, and I believe that we're at the tipping point of such a surge of technology in our industry as well. But I think many of us who've been involved in digital media over the course of the last few years could argue the opposite, which is technology has actually introduced more complexity, not less. And the reasons for that are, in my mind at least, pretty straightforward. The fundamental reason is that the advertising space has become incredibly more fragmented, with the media consumption choices that are available to all of us spanning millions and millions of websites and applications that we can access through literally billions of devices, whether they're smartphones or tablets or laptops or televisions. The choices are infinite, and so the audiences are fragmented across all of these channels, which is, of course, in stark contrast to the way that traditional advertising has worked in decades in the past. If you go back 50 years, for example, to 1961, consumers had the choice of a couple of television networks, a couple of radio stations, a couple of newspapers, depending on where they lived. And as recently as 30 years ago in the US, if you bought a 30-second spot at 8 p.m. on prime time on the three major networks, you had a good chance of reaching 2/3 of the national audience. Of course, those days are long gone, and technology has brought about this massive fragmentation where, 10 years ago, 5% of users, consumers were online. Today, that number is 25%. That's over 2 billion people in the world. And they're consuming content from millions and millions of websites. Every single month, there's another 15 million plus websites being created. In fact, in the last several days, there was more content created online than existed on the entire World Wide Web in 2003. That's pretty phenomenal if you think about it, and that proliferation of content and choices for consumers is only growing, not shrinking. Mobile and video technologies are further exacerbating that, with smartphones set to take over laptops in terms of usage in just a couple of short years, bringing online those 4 billion users who were previously not having access to the internet, now having direct access, leapfrogging laptops, for example, via their mobile phones. And video, I think many of you have heard the stat, perhaps, that every single minute, 35 hours of new video content are uploaded to YouTube every single minute of the day. So this proliferation of content is leading to this massive fragmentation, all being driven by technology. What I'm going to argue for the next few minutes is that the same technology can be used to harness this fragmented world that we live in, to allow all of us as marketers to get in front of the right audience and deliver the right message to that audience. So how do we get there? Well, the first thing's very clear, which is that the old way of how we've been doing business in the past is simply not going to work. Contrary to the way that the marketing industry is developed, we can no longer count on a single newspaper or TV outlet or any other sort of major media outlet to aggregate our audience for us. We need to be able to go out and find the audience across the millions and millions of places that they can exist, and then deliver the right message to them. And we need to harness the technology that's created this fragmentation in the first place to do exactly that. I'm going to talk about how this technology can be used to understand our audiences better, find those audiences, deliver the right creative at the right time to those audiences, and then precisely measure what the impact of all of that has been. And I'd argue, and hopefully everybody will see this towards the end of my talk, that it's going to have a profound impact not just on agencies and advertisers, but media companies and publishers, as well as on all of us as consumers. The first is kind of an obvious point, which is technology can make us a lot smarter about how we think about finding the audiences that we're looking for. And what I mean by that is that we can harness technology to really deeply understand our audiences, characteristics about the audience that we're looking to target, and where we can find those users online. It used to be, for example, if a publisher, let's say a newspaper website, wanted to offer advertising products geared towards in-market car buyers and sell those to auto manufacturers, for example, they'd just create an auto section of their newspaper and sell advertising inventory against the stories that ran in that section. Well, today they no longer have to. Using anonymous data that's been aggregated about the behavior of users across multiple websites, they can determine in real time who the in-market car buyers are on their website, and then also in real time be able to deliver ads to them even when they're not on the auto sections of their newspaper. So for example, when those browsers are visiting the business section or sports section, they can still get an ad for a product that they're interested in because we know that they happen to be in the market for a car. And as an advertiser, you can now not just find those users across the entire newspaper's website, but you can find those users across millions of websites by leveraging this technology. So while your audience is fragmented and exists not just on 3 major television networks, but now across millions and millions of outlets, you can use this technology about amassing anonymized data across the internet to find users in real time wherever they happen to be. And not only is technology changing the way that we understand our audiences, it's transforming the way that we buy and sell advertising. Many of us have grown up in the advertising industry in an environment where you bought ad space days or weeks or months or even quarters in advance, where publishers and advertisers would spend hours negotiating the exact price, exactly how many impressions were being bought on what particular ad slot. And that would happen months in advance. Well, what would happen, for example, if there was a major news story and the amount of inventory that was sold 6 months ago increased dramatically because of the traffic spikes that were coming to that news publisher's website as a result of that story? In this scenario that I painted, all of those impressions would go unsold, leaving the publisher with an incredible amount of inventory that wasn't being monetized. And similarly, advertisers that were being forced to make decisions on what type of media to buy weeks or months in advance were doing that when they had imprecise information about the product that they were offering, what the macroeconomic trends in the particular region that they were running the campaign were going to look like 2 or 3 or 6 months down the road. And all of this buying and selling that was occurring in these upfronts when, by definition, publishers and advertisers had less than perfect information led, of course, to suboptimal results for everybody involved. Well, that no longer has to be the case. With the emergence of new technologies like ad exchanges, literally stock exchanges for buying and selling display advertising, for example, you can now move that decision of what type of media to buy at what price from weeks or months in advance to instantaneous, literally a split second before that ad is being delivered. In an ad exchange world, for example, when a user visits a website, a real-time auction is kicked off where hundreds of thousands of advertisers are competing for that ad slot, and the highest eCPM advertiser wins and the ad is delivered. It's called real-time bidding. And we, on Google's, for example, DoubleClick ad exchange, we run more real-time bidded ad impressions than all the stock and bond trades that occur on all the world stock exchanges combined every single day. And we process those transactions, literally billions of transactions, 5 times faster than the blink of an eye. And this real-time bidding allows advertisers to combine what they know about that ad impression, who the user is, what context that user is in, such as what website they're on, what day of the week it is, what time it is, even what the weather is outside, to assemble the most amount of information to determine where they should buy and at what price they should buy inventory, all instantaneously a split second before that ad's being delivered. You can imagine the ROI boost that advertisers are seeing through technology like this. And of course, it turns into increased revenue for publishers. We ran for example, we ran a survey across all the publishers that took advantage of the double-click ad exchange at Google. And what we saw on average was that publishers that offered their inventory this way saw 188% lift in revenue. That's 3 times more revenue than they were making through previous ways of monetizing that exact same inventory. Real money in the pockets of our publishers, better ROI for advertisers. Of course, it's not just about finding the right audience. It's about, once you find that audience, how do you deliver the best possible creative or the best possible message to that audience? And the prevailing wisdom has always been that creativity versus technology is a zero-sum game. Either you spent a tremendous amount of time coming up with a great creative concept, but you ran that creative concept only on a handful of publishers just because of the sheer amount of effort it took between publishers and advertisers to get that concept up and running. Or, conversely, you had a creative concept that you ran across millions and millions of websites that was the same everywhere, regardless of relevancy to the users or whatever context the users was in. What if there was a technology, however, though, that took the great work that's done from a creative standpoint and multiplied the power of it a millionfold by creating millions and millions of permutations of that same creative concept, changing little things like the background color or the copy or the product that's actually featured in that creative concept millions of times a day, literally on the fly, based on who the user is, where they're located, what context they're in, etc. Wouldn't that have a tremendous impact, not just on performance, but also in making that type of advertising tremendously more engaging to all of us as consumers? Well, technology is emerging to do that. Google acquired a company a little over a year ago called Terracent that does exactly that. And I can actually walk you through an example of how that would actually manifest itself for all of us as consumers. So here's an example of a person, let's call him Bob, who lives in California. And he goes to YouTube to watch his catch-up TV or what have you, or catch up on other sorts of videos. We also know that he happens to be browsing a lot of websites that have to do with luxury cars because he's in the market for a car. Wouldn't it be amazing if the technology was able to determine, because Bob is browsing for cars, the best type of advertising to deliver to him is one that has a car in it, and also, because he happens to be living in sunny California, perhaps the best type of car to show in the ad to pique his interest is a convertible. We also happen to know that in addition to surfing around for luxury cars, Bob is also surfing around and looking for, planning for a vacation to the UK to celebrate his, let's say, his 10th wedding anniversary. And, so he's spending time looking at hotel websites, gifts for his wife, etc. Well, with this new additional piece of information, perhaps the car manufacturer can change the ad to something that's a little bit more relevant to the types of interests that Bob has at that particular moment in time to make the advertising even that much more relevant and timely to Bob. Now, of course, this is an example. It's an overly simplified example, but hopefully all of you get the idea that each one of these advertisements can consist of 20, 30, 50 constituent elements that can all change on the fly depending on the characteristics that we know about Bob, the types of things that he's interested in, the types of websites he happens to be on, the context that he's in, and change that millions and billions of times a day, where the auto manufacturer in this case comes up with a simple creative concept and the technology does the rest by turning it into a million different creative concepts. That's what technology can deliver to us today. And by the way, it's not something that should be limited just to graphical advertising on the internet, although that's what that example was about. The emergence of new technologies like mobile and video are making it even more interesting in terms of what we can do to deliver a relevant messaging to audiences out there. Mobile is, the analogy that I like to use is that with the advent of smartphones and their growth throughout the world, it's as if we're all walking around with little supercomputers in our pocket. The capabilities of these devices are so profound, and I think they're going to have a massive impact on how we think about advertising and reaching consumers throughout 24 hours a day. Just to give you a simple example, let's say you're in a subway, or you've just gotten off a plane at the airport, and you see a picture of a product, let's say a pair of sneakers or something like that you're interested in. Wouldn't it be great if you could just simply hold up your phone to that image, and as the phone captures that image, up pops a website or an application that can tell you a lot more about that sneaker. For example, videos of your favorite sports players using that product in whatever competitive sport they're participating in. Or perhaps, wouldn't it be more useful if you could, in addition to that, you saw a map that showed you the stores and the prices at which you could actually buy those sneakers on your way home from work or to the hotel? That type of advertising exists, and that's still the very, very early days. Imagine what's going to happen as these devices get even more sophisticated and can process even more information and data. Video is just as interesting. I already talked about the amount of video content that's being uploaded to websites like YouTube every single minute. We're all consuming more and more video online every single day. And I would argue that video advertising has the potential to completely transform how we think about marketing in general, completely turn it on its head. Some of you may have heard about a product that Google introduced a few months ago called TrueView ads. TrueView ads are pretty simple. They put the power in the hands of the consumer. So if you're watching an ad, say a pre-roll before your favorite video highlight clip comes on, if you're not interested in that ad, you can simply fast forward and skip it. It's like a mini DVR that's plugged directly into your browser. And as an advertiser, you only pay for advertising that's actually watched by viewers, as opposed to whether or not the viewer watches it, which is the way, of course, all CPM advertising works today. This is a win-win-win. The consumers only watch the types of ads that they're truly relevant to them and that they're interested in. Advertisers only pay when they've actually gotten an engaged user to watch that ad. And publishers benefit because advertisers, on average, value that type of inventory at 10x or even more than what they were traditionally paying for traditional pre-rolls. And that, again, is just the beginning of what's going to be possible as these new channels continue to emerge. So I've talked a lot about examples about finding the right audience and then delivering the right message to that audience. But nothing really matters if you can't measure what the impact of those campaigns has been. And in the digital media world, we've all grown up with the fundamental metrics of impressions, clicks, and conversions being the way that we measure the efficacy of our campaigns. But we all know that there's a lot more than that. We want to measure brand lift. We want to measure cross-media, cross-channel reach, for example. We want to measure ad effectiveness, such as the impact of online campaigns on offline sales, and other measurements like that. Technology is making all of that possible. And this is technology that even a year ago would not have existed. Just to give you a concrete example, a few months ago during the World Cup, Coca-Cola ran a big campaign that ran across TV, print, radio, and online display advertising. And through the technology that measured the impact of this campaign, what they found was that the online portion of their campaign found an incremental 3% reach at much cheaper than it would have cost if they had just tried to get that reach offline. And more interestingly, 25% of the users who were exposed to that campaign online had never been exposed to the TV version of that campaign. And as a result, the brand lift that Coke got as a result of this blended online-offline campaign was something that they were able to achieve for nearly 2 million euros cheaper than if they had spent all of that money offline, for example. So this amount of precise measurement are things that we can actually do now towards very, very concrete goals, and they allow advertisers to really, really get at the results that they're looking for. So technology can have a pretty profound application across finding the right audience, delivering the right ad to that audience at the right time, and then precisely measuring what the impact of that advertising is going to be. And I would argue that the impact that it's going to have on all of us in this room is going to be profound over the course of the next couple of years. Starting with agencies and advertisers, I think it's obvious that we're all going to need to adapt because this technology exists today, it's only proliferating, and those of us that don't adapt are going to be left behind. The message there, I think, is pretty simple and doesn't take much argument. But what does that actually mean? I think it means that what technology should allow us to do as marketers is focus on the things that we do best. Technology is not there to replace those things. It's actually to take out the mundane tasks that we've all unfortunately gotten used to as digital media grows and allow us to focus on things like creativity, clever insights, and the effective use of data to forward our marketing objectives. That's what technology can do. For example, you shouldn't spend hours and hours negotiating a campaign months in advance when you can simply decide what your goals are, what objectives you'd like to reach, what parameters under which you want to define those objectives, and let technologies like ad exchanges and real-time bidding do your work for you. You should focus your efforts on things like creativity and actually really connecting with consumers and let the technology multiply the power of that creativity as I described a millionfold. And finally, instead of collating and pulling reports across publishers and ad networks and advertisers and agencies to deliver back to clients, you should be spending your time on the true market insights that actually really deliver value for future campaigns and let technology take care of that measurement and collation and inefficiency that exists in the market and deliver something that's much more efficient. As I hopefully was able to describe, the impact on media companies is also going to be pretty profound. We've all known as publishers that our data is incredibly valuable, and this technology, hopefully I've been able to describe, will allow us to actually take advantage of that audience data. I already mentioned that, for example, publishers that take advantage of technology like real-time bidding and ad exchanges are seeing 188% lift, 3 times more revenue. And they do that with much, much more control than they could have ever done in the past. Control over who the advertisers are that run on their website, what types of ads run, at what prices those advertisers run, differentially across different types of ad slots, etc. We all know that publishers typically have monetized their inventory in 2 fundamental ways: inventory that they've sold directly via their direct sales force, and inventory that gets monetized through indirect channels. Well, I would argue that technology is making that artificial distinction between those channels truly obsolete. New technology, for example, things like dynamic allocation, which, as the name suggests, means dynamically allocating every single ad slot in real time to where the highest eCPM is coming from, are going to do away with those artificial distinctions because they will guarantee that for every single ad delivered on that publisher's website or on their mobile app, it's always going to the ad that's generating the highest eCPM possible for that publisher. So it's simple. A lot more revenue and a lot more control is what this technology is going to mean for publishers that are in the audience. And perhaps most importantly, for all of us as consumers, I hope the impact is going to be profound as well. And the way I think it's going to manifest itself is in much, much more relevant advertising. I'm sure the majority of the people in this audience have DVRs. When's the last time that when we were watching something through our DVR that we actually sat through the commercial? Most of the time we fast forward it. That's because we're bombarded every single day with irrelevant messages with the hope that at least some of them we'll try to get through just by sheer repetition. Well, what if the technology that I just described truly made advertising dramatically more relevant for all of us as consumers so that advertisers could do more with less? Less advertising for all of us, but much, much more useful advertising. I think that would benefit not just the entire industry, but would create an experience for all of us as consumers as the digital economy continues to grow that we would favor as opposed to the way that the world exists today. Of course, all of this needs to be done paying careful heed to privacy expectations of consumers, transparency, notice, choice, and control. And that shouldn't just be a slogan or a tagline or a privacy policy that's slapped up on our websites. It needs to be backed up by true technology. And one of the products that I'm the most excited about is something that's called the Ads Preferences Manager. And it's a link that you can go through clicking on the icon, for example, that appears in advertising that's served by companies like Google. And with a matter of a couple of clicks, you can opt out of all personal advertising completely if it's not something that's interesting to you. But more interestingly, you can go to it and actually change and decide in granular fashion what specific areas you'd like to receive advertising messages on, so that you can ensure that the types of ads that you get are actually relevant and useful for you. And many users are taking advantage of that. Finally, it's really, as I was thinking about, what I was going to say this afternoon, it's really profound the amount of parallels that you can draw between Wall Street and Madison Avenue. Just as inventions like the real-time stock ticker or continuous trading on stock exchanges like the NYSE brought about a much more liquid, a much more efficient, a much more effective way of buying and selling shares in companies globally from the world that was really inefficient, where prices weren't determined in real time, and where all trading had to happen in a hyper-local type of environment. All the technology that I've talked about, things like real-time bidding, ad exchanges, et cetera, are going to do the same thing for Madison Avenue, and I think that's going to present tremendous opportunities to all of us here. The biggest opportunity being that advertisers and agencies that have the best sort of creative, the best content if you're a publisher, and the ability to leverage your data in insightful ways are the ones that are going to thrive in this environment. And the final thing that I would say as a result of this is that the industry, which today globally, if you define display advertising as everything that's mobile, video, rich media, and graphical ads on the internet, is a $24 billion industry. I would submit to all of you that if we take advantage of the technology in the ways that I described, this industry in a few short years is going to be a $200 billion industry. That's why we at Google are extremely excited about it, why we're investing so heavily in it, and I look forward to working with all of you to leverage the technology to get us there as quickly as possible.